Hello, welcome back. It's been a while since I've done a reading report. Now, the last one that I did was of books that I had read a couple of weeks before I made the video, and that is going to be the case in this video also because I am quite behind. I've spent the last couple of weeks going from one illness to the other. I'm perfectly fine now, but it was pretty rough there for a couple of days. So I read a lot, and I fell way behind in video making, so I'm trying to catch up now. And we're going to go back now about 2 weeks. And the first book that I read was Das Boot by Lothar-Gunthar Buchheim. And as you may imagine, this is a novel that takes place on a U-boat during the Second World War. Now, Lothar-Gunthar Buchheim in real life had been in the German Navy in the Second World War. He was a naval war correspondent. And so he was put on various ships with a camera, and he would go out on patrols, take pictures, and really observe everything that was going on, and then write articles about it that were published in, I guess, in newspapers or magazines or something. I'm not really sure. And he was sent out several times on U-boats. And he says at the beginning of this book that nothing in this book was not something that he saw with his own eyes, even though it took place over various patrols and not just on one. And I know that perhaps you're thinking, well, these are the bad guys, right? We want them to suffer, we want them to get blown up. I mean, and that is true. These were the bad guys. But the interesting thing about this book is that Lothar-Gunthar Buchheim really humanizes these characters. And the main character is very much based on himself. He brings home their plight of how they were in the Navy, maybe as a career for the long term, and they got dragged into this war, or they're very young men who were affected by propaganda because these men on the U-boats were sort of held up as the elite of the Navy and portrayed as being noble knights of the sea. And so that really drew in a lot of young men into this adventure, this sort of old-fashioned adventure of glory and all of that. And others who were just sort of drafted and made to do this, even though they really didn't want to, and they had no stake in the war and that sort of thing. And the main character is very much based on Lothar-Gunthar Buchheim because he is a naval war correspondent who has been assigned to this U-boat, and he has exactly the same job that Buchheim would have had in real life. So taking pictures, writing about it, and hopefully living to see the end of this patrol to come back to France. They are in occupied France at the beginning of this book. And so we get a look at, we start this book at a party, a really raucous party where all these boys and these captains are just getting completely hammered because they are going to leave in the morning. And as Buchheim points out in the very beginning of this, that 30,000 out of 40,000 U-boat sailors died in the war. And this is right around the time that the Allies had started using active sonar and radar. And so it was not like in the very beginning of the war when the U-boats really ruled the seas. Many of these boats are going out and they are just never heard from again. Very soon, within a week, they are just gone completely. And they are being either destroyed by airplanes that are flying overhead, or they are being destroyed by destroyers, which were built purposefully to counter the U-boat threat with depth charges and that sort of thing. And so we set out on this patrol, and this is told in the first-person perspective, so we get it all from first person. And he tells us about the captain, about these other crew members, and it's a really interesting book in that most of the time books like this that were written by people who were there and saw it with their own eyes, they were in one part of the submarine or another. There wasn't really, except for a few members, a few officers, most people had their stations and they stayed there the majority of the time, whereas the main character of this book can go anywhere really at any time. So he can be on the bridge, he can be in the engine room, the crew compartments, just wherever. And he always eats with the officers, so he's next to the captain all the time. He's often on the bridge with the captain. And these were diesel electric boats, so they always had to surface. They had these electric batteries, but at this time, this is before the snorkel came into use. So they still had to surface and recharge these batteries that they could use while they were underwater. And their purpose is to go out and destroy Allied shipping and Allied warships but mostly shipping. They're mostly concentrating on shipping. And we see how these people are, they really want to do their job well because that is what they are there for. That is what is expected of them in their society. But we also see that they are very sick of this. They don't want to do it anymore. They're very afraid that they're going to die, whether they admit it or not. They would much rather be home. They are sick of the propaganda. They're sick of all the lies they're hearing about themselves and about their friends, many of whom are dead. They are reading these propaganda rags, and they know that they are lies, that they are garbage. And yet there is also for them the thrill of the sea, the thrill of being out on their own as this kind of solitary hunter, chasing these prizes. It all rests on the shoulders of the captain. He's called the old man or the captain throughout the book, or Herr Kapitänleutnant, or they shortened it to Herr Kaloin. And so this is very, very much like the miniseries from was it the late 70s or the early 80s? Very good. If you've never seen it, you should watch it. And this book really, it is very well done. And honestly, it's more well done than a lot of books that were written by submarine captains and that sort of thing, crew members on these subs. And I think that is because Buchheim primarily thought of himself as an artist, as a writer, as a photographer. And so even during the war, he was paying attention to everything around him with the idea that he might have to write about this someday, or that he might want to write about this someday if he survived. And so we really get a feeling of what it would have been like to be on one of these U-boats. These long, endless seeming periods of boredom, coupled with moments of thrill and excitement and absolute terror and mortal dread of being destroyed, of being sunk, of either dying immediately of a rupture in the hull and drowning, or being killed in an explosion, or sinking to the bottom and slowly running out of oxygen. And so a large part of this novel is them just being at sea, searching for a target and not being able to find one, while being hounded by aircraft and being hounded by destroyers, and having to dive the ship in an emergency and get away as fast as they possibly can, to get away from these bombs that are going to fall out of the air, or to get away from these depth charges. And Buchheim likens it not to, a lot of people have likened this to cat and mouse games, whereas he likened it to a rabbit being chased by a pack of ferocious hounds. Because once the submarine is underwater, it is really helpless, and all it can do is get away. And so everyone on board this ship, or this boat, knows that just at any moment they could be killed. And one of these depth charges, if it lands anywhere within about 100 yards of this boat, it can rupture the hull, flood it, and kill everyone aboard, or send them to the bottom, and they will never get off the bottom. And I just thought this was really well done. And so I think that this book was in a lot of ways done better than a lot of memoirs that have been written about the war, because I feel like Buchheim, by primarily seeing himself as an artist, as a writer, and using fiction, and not being under the same constraints that a lot of, say, American submarine captains and that sort of thing felt, to sort of gloss over the sheer terror and maybe the crude language and the sexual jokes and that sort of thing. Buchheim felt very free to include all that. So there's a lot of conversations about women and what these young guys got up to with women, and Buchheim believed that it was all mostly boasting, that it was just them trying to seem bold and brave and cooler than they actually were. And he talks a lot about the captain, about how the captain is playing this role really, and sometimes he can see that role, especially in these moments where they are just on the edge of being killed. He can see that role kind of crack. And they go through a lot in this book, through storms, terrible weather for weeks at a time, through being targets of these depth charges and these airplanes. And also there's a lot of talk about things that bothered them day to day, being constantly wet. Everywhere in this boat being wet. Their food is packed everywhere they can possibly put food, because there's really no room for it. Their bread would mold, their sausages would mold, even their clothes, their shoes, their sheets, everything would start to grow mold after a while. And it was terribly uncomfortable for them. And I just thought this was really well done. This was really well written. And I think that this may have been the best book that I ever read on this subject, on submarines during the Second World War. And so if you are into that sort of thing, check this out. You probably really like it. Now, after that is a book that I read it and I appreciated the facts of this book. I appreciated what the writer was trying to do, but I didn't like it overall. So the book in question is Nuclear War: A Scenario by Annie Jacobsen, excuse me. And now this is exactly what it says, Nuclear War: A Scenario. This is about what would happen if we came to a point where the United States was forced to launch a nuclear attack on an enemy in response to an attack on us, and what might happen around the world minute by minute, hour by hour. And so I thought that was actually pretty well done. So the thing about this book, to me personally, and maybe why it didn't click with me, is that I am tremendously familiar with nuclear war. I have read many, many books on the subject, fiction and nonfiction. I've watched many documentaries, TV shows, TV documentaries. Uh, this is a subject that I have been reading about, that I have been sort of loosely studying, I guess, for the last 20 years of my life. And so absolutely nothing in this book really was new to me except for personal anecdotes of the people that she interviewed. And so I think that this book didn't have quite the effect on me that it would have for someone who was coming into this completely unfamiliar with the subject. I think that somebody coming into this who's unfamiliar with the subject would probably be overawed by nuclear war itself, by learning all these facts about how these missiles will only take, I think, 26 minutes, something like that, to reach the United States and vice versa, and how at any moment this could happen, how the president will only have about 6 minutes or so to decide what to do in response. That is all pretty well done. Kind of one thing I didn't really like about this is the way that she was writing it. There was a style to this. There are a lot of fragmented sentences where rather than write 2 or 3 sentences together and form it into one sentence, as maybe another writer would have, she would fragment that into 3 sentences, and I never quite understood what the point of that was, except for maybe she was trying to convey an air of bluntness. This happened, then this happened, then this will happen, then they will do this. And it's I don't know, I personally thought it failed on that level because I have read other books that have done that much, much better, fiction and nonfiction. Something that frustrated me was that she sort of comes into this in the beginning and she sort of lightly says that the government has not been telling us the truth about this, and that she sort of implies that she is the first one to bring this all out, to tell the truth to the people, which is not true. Lots of people have written about this subject over the last 65, 70 years. More than that even now, come to think of it. And so that is not true. And one thing I found kind of frustrating was the scenario itself, which is that North Korea, so none of the world leaders in this are named, but apparently one morning Kim Jong-un wakes up and he has gone insane and he is extremely mad because of that satellite photo of North Korea where it is just dark, where like China is really bright and South Korea is really bright, and then North Korea is just like this empty ocean of darkness. And so he decides to launch a first strike on the United States, and the Americans decide to launch 100 ICBMs at North Korea, and also to send up B-1 bombers and to send up SLBMs from submarines, right? So it is just this completely devastating launch. And the Russians see this, and because these missiles are going to go over the North Pole, they're going to cross over Russian airspace, the Russians react and attack the United States. But there are several issues with that, about how she goes about doing that. And I, I think that she was trying to show, okay, well, this is a worst case scenario, but I feel like she kind of failed to convey that successfully. So she is very repetitive about the damage and destruction that these bombs will do, to the point of using the exact same words over and over and over, and explaining what these bombs will do to human bodies and to everything in the vicinity of them, and conveying that gore, that violence, this world-ending violence. That's perfectly fine, but she says, basically, she uses the same words over and over, to the point where it's like, yes, I get it, okay? Like, either say it a different way, or just accept the fact that you've already said it and do not need to say it again. And early on in this book, she falsely attributes a quote to Napoleon Bonaparte, which was actually said by, I believe it was by Louis XV, which is "Après moi le déluge," after me the flood. So Louis XV said that, Napoleon did not. And so that sort of makes you wonder, like, if she got that quote wrong, a quote that is very easy to look up, it does make you wonder what else she got wrong throughout this book. And that sort of bothered me, and I do wonder what else she got wrong. So I wasn't like reading this with a pencil. I wasn't writing things down or anything like this. I didn't expect to read this. I just picked it up and I started reading it. And like I said, I do think that if you are someone who is unfamiliar with the subject, this is terrifying. And it is, to a point, pretty well done. But I do think that this could have been done much better. I think if she was going to write this book in the way that she wrote it, rather than trying to make it blunt and having all these fragmented sentences and kind of mixing in some drama that goes nowhere, I feel like she could have expanded upon all of that, polished it up, and had a much better book. That's just my feelings on it. All right, so I think this is going to be the last book I'll talk about today, just because of time constraints. I'd like to edit this and post it today, because it has been about a week since I have posted a video, and I am actually missing having conversations with you, having discussions with you. And now, in the beginning, when I was sick, I was kind of happy to not be making videos, and I thought, well, I'll just take a little vacation, but I'm glad to be back from my vacation. So the last book I want to talk about is Eiger Dreams by Jon Krakauer, which is really shiny in the light there. So this is by Jon Krakauer, who is one of my favorite writers. He wrote Into Thin Air, Into the Wild. There's a collection of his called Classic Krakauer. There's one about Pat Tillman called Where Men Win Glory. He's also written a book called Under the Banner of Heaven, which is, I think, the last book of his that I have not read, and so I'll start searching for that soon. I usually see that. It's about a subject that doesn't particularly interest me, but I'm going to read it anyway, because I have yet to read anything by Jon Krakauer that I didn't like. This is a collection of his articles, which were written for outdoors magazines, for rock climbing magazines, and that sort of thing. So Jon Krakauer, I'm not sure if he's still climbing mountains, but he used to climb mountains as a hobby and that sort of thing, and he would write articles about it. And he would go places and talk to other mountain climbers and people like that and write articles about them, sometimes about surfers, people who climbed boulders, all kinds of different things. And so I am not a mountain climber, and I have to admit that the specifics of the names of the mountain climbers in this book have sort of fled my mind since I read it, and the specific locations of these mountains. I want to say that the Eiger is in Switzerland. Now, there was a Clint Eastwood movie about the Eiger, but I never saw it. Actually, I did, but I was like 11, and I don't remember it very well. But it is about the Eiger Dreams. The article is about when Jon Krakauer went to the Eiger to climb it, and sort of how the Eiger defeated them, the winds, the snow. It is like a 6,000-foot sheer cliff covered in ice and snow, with these extremely fast, destructive winds that hit it out of nowhere. The one that I liked the best, though, I think, was about a math professor who basically single-handedly invented the sport of bouldering. So he had been mountain climbing, but he got it in his mind that he wanted to do something that was he could do closer to home and without so much equipment that would present just as large of a challenge. And so he would go out and climb these 20, 30-foot boulders with overhangs where he could just barely grasp a ledge or maybe get his finger in a crack or something and just slowly work his way up these boulders. And in fact, I found a book the other day about bouldering, and I don't know why I didn't buy it. It was from the 90s. I should have bought it anyway. It was really interesting, mapping these routes on these boulders. And if you have ever been up close to a boulder, like one of the first things I remember trying to climb in my life was a boulder. And it was just a sheer rock face, maybe 15 feet tall, maybe not quite, maybe it's like 11 or 12 feet tall. And I would try to climb that boulder. And there's just there's nowhere to grab on. There's nowhere to put your feet. And he mastered the art of climbing that sort of stuff. So that was really interesting. And people kind of laughed at him and made fun of him until they started trying it themselves and saw how difficult it was. And he talks about just the strength that he has to have in his hands, in his legs and everything, and how he goes up these overhangs and that sort of thing without falling off, and the actual danger that you are in from doing that sort of thing, because if you fall off and you hit a rock or something, you could shatter your spine. And I think my other favorite from this book was an account that Krakauer gave of when he was in his early 20s and he decided that he was going to go to Alaska and climb, what was it called? The Devil's Thumb, which is it's a mountain that comes to this point, and you go up to the top of this mountain and you can like hang on to this point. Well, he was severely underprepared for this. So he quit his job in Colorado. He drove up to, I think, is it Oregon or Washington? I always get the order of those two states mixed up as to which is north of the other. And he took an airplane to Alaska. He set it up with someone there to deliver some supplies for him. He climbed up this very dangerous glacier with all these, are they called crevasses? And he almost fell in at one point. He rigged up this contraption of curtain rods so that if he fell, the curtain rods would hopefully catch him on either side. And that actually did save his life at one point. And he talks about how he got out of that and he immediately started puking and like crying because he was so scared. And he talks about dealing day after day with these howling winds, with the snow that would bury his tent, how he accidentally caught his tent on fire and burned up most of it, and how I don't remember if he made it to the summit. I think that he did. But it was really good. And I want to say that he talked about that trip at the end of Into the Wild as well, how he talked about sometimes when you are young and brave and bold, you may think that you are ready for something and you really aren't, and how it can easily go very bad in the same sense that it went bad for the young man who he wrote about in Into the Wild. I cannot remember. Was it Christopher McCandless? I think it was Christopher McCandless, who, of course, went to Alaska and sort of was very idealistic about what he could do and overestimated what he could do and what he could get from the land and wound up dying. So I really enjoyed this. If you're into mountaineering and that sort of thing, I mean, you've probably already heard of Krakauer. If you are not even interested in mountain climbing and rock climbing or anything like that, you should still pick it up because John Krakauer is a really good writer. These books are always interesting. I have yet to read one that was not interesting and not worth reading. So I think I'm going to call it a day on this video because I have like 3 more books to talk about. I've been talking for over 30 minutes now. I'm a little bit dry, and maybe I will go ahead and make that other video now. I don't know. It is 3 o'clock on Saturday the 22nd. I'm hopefully going to try to post this evening. Hopefully 5 o'clock, 5:30. I don't know. We'll have to see. I have to go watch this and edit it, and we'll see how that works out. tomorrow I hopefully will have more time and be able to make more videos. So that is what I have been reading. Das Boot by Lothar-Gunthar Buchheim, Nuclear War, A Scenario by Annie Jacobsen, and Eiger Dreams by John Krakauer. All right, I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you have taken an interest in some of these books, and I will see you next time.